Can your personality predict whether you're more likely to drink coffee versus tea versus pop? And what does this have to do with the hypothesis that people who drink black coffee are more likely to be psychopaths? So we see that things like caffeine, including its use in things like coffees and teas, do correlate with certain personality traits. If you're higher in neuroticism, so if you answer the question of I am commonly easily stressed out, if you say yes to that, you're more likely to drink pop. Now, side note, I am from the Midwest. I'm going to call this pop. You can call this Coke. You can call this soda if you want to. I don't care. So you're more likely to drink those if you are high on neuroticism. Now we see that extroversion versus introversion, that doesn't matter that much. So if you're more outgoing, you spend more time with people, you enjoy going to a party where you don't know people, that does not have to do with how likely you are to enjoy coffee. Now for tea and pop versus coffee, those were more closely linked to certain personality profiles. And they were kind of pleasant versus unpleasant. So unsurprisingly, the scientists found that people who drank tea had a more pleasant, mature profile. People who drank tea were more persistent and they avoided harm less. So they were more likely to just kind of face the obstacles in their life versus the pop people had a very unfavorable profile. They used some genuinely unpleasant terms for people who drank pop. So they were saying that they were more pessimistic, more likely to be immature. They were more unstable and less cooperative in general. So basically everyone could be a coffee drinker. The tea drinkers were more mature, and the people who drank pop were more likely to want to kind of constantly try out new things and to try to avoid harm. They also found that your preferences in drinking coffee versus tea versus pop depended on what type of person you were in terms of sleep. Are you the early bird? So do you naturally want to wake up at 5 a.m.? Or are you a night owl where you want to fall asleep later? And they found that people who were more night owls, they tended to drink more coffee and pop. Now, they were not drinking these items to actually stay awake or to change their cycle. They basically drank them at the same time that people who were morning people drank them. But for some reason, the coffee and pop drinkers were more likely to just be night owls. Which, side note, can we not stigmatize night owls? There is this weird idea that people who like to wake up early are great and that's what you should be doing. No, you don't have to do that. Just because our society is built on it doesn't mean that you can't just want to sleep in. You're not lazy. Okay, done with my pep talk for night owls now. Now, another study found that people who were more extroverted and more conscientious, so those are people who are more likely to plan and never turn in things late. People who were highly extroverted and conscientious were more likely to buy this fair trade co-op coffee. So the kind of more expensive specialty coffee. They would pay extra money to be able to buy that. But I read through that study and I have some questions about it, so I wouldn't kind of hold a lot of weight to those findings. Now, what about psychopathy and the dark triads? So there was this kind of idea going around for a while that black coffee was linked to being a psychopath. And here is where that came from. So there's this original study that was looking at people who preferred bitter tastes. And they said that people who preferred bitter tastes were more likely to be high in some of the qualities of what are known as the dark triad. So these are personality traits linked to very problematic behaviors. So the personality traits are things like narcissism, Machiavellianism, which by the way is a mouthful, and psychopathy. So basically you don't feel empathy towards other people. You are the center of your world and everybody else's world, and you are willing to control the outside world based on what you think. Now, what they found is that people who had greater appreciation for bitter taste, so who preferred food that tasted bitter, like black coffee and dark chocolate, they were more likely to be high in things like psychopathy. And this was specifically linked to bitter tastes. So they found that this occurred as well with sour, but when they did the statistical results, sour didn't seem to really do much. It was specifically bitter taste. Now, this study was terrible. So this study gets trotted out every once in a while, but it was just basically a survey of asking people what food they liked, and then also asking them if they had these psychopathic traits. Which is just not the best science, and definitely not the best science to say that people who drink black coffee are psychopaths. So don't use those results to back up this idea that I'm not going to date that person because they drink black coffee and that means that they are not going to have empathy and they're eventually just going to steal all my money and run. Don't use that as the reason. I'm sure you can come up with a bazillion other deal breakers that are just as weird and just as acceptable and not based on terrible science. Like they don't wear socks to the airport and wander around on those floors in their bare feet, or never cut their toenails. So, personality traits might predict what somebody prefers to drink in terms of things like coffee, tea, or soda. But does your personality relate to how coffee or caffeine actually affects you? There are a couple of studies out there on this, and they're not the best, unfortunately, but they do suggest that things like extroverts might benefit more from coffee than introverts. So they might actually be more likely to get some of that cognitive enhancing effect. So they might do better at things like focus and attention and memory, whereas introverts actually found kind of like a problematic effect of coffee. So coffee with a time crunch actually made them less likely to perform well. And there's another study that suggests that extroverts might be potentially happier after caffeine intake than introverts, but again, this is not great science. In general, the science is pretty hard to do. So a lot of times people are just asking questions on questionnaires and then like correlating the two things together instead of running like proper experiments on this. Because personality is something that we just basically measure through a questionnaire. And there's a huge glaring flaw in this, in that most of the studies done on this do not actually control for things like smoking. So what we see is that a lot of people use high levels of caffeine combined with things like nicotine. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, we do see that other drug use is strongly correlated with personality types too, including impulsivity. So this is kind of fun to think about, but do not use it to actually make any of your day-to-day decisions. And go on drinking whatever type of caffeinated beverage you prefer.